Hello, I'm Murray Carter of Carter Cutlery. In our last video, I showed you how we made these custom octagonal handles for the high-grade series knives that we hand forge. And today I want to continue on with that theme and show you how we make the handles for our ever-popular neck knife series. This is my daily carry knife here. I'm going to kind of show you the woodworking that takes place between the raw materials and the finished product. So we have here, as you can see, just a bunch of knives that we've been working on. And here's one. This is a Damascus Blade. It's 641 layers of Damascus steel. We made this at last Thursday's open house. And you can see it's got the tang there. And now we need to decide what we're going to do for a handle. So we would go to our handle supply, and we might select something such as this stabilized burl, or maybe a nice piece of ironwood, and we would take this to the bandsaw and cut a proper size dimension material. Say, for example, here's a pair of ironwood, and it's been cut into two pieces so it'll fit that blade nicely. Now we've gone ahead and we've glued on some red liner material. Red usually looks pretty good with ironwood. Use any color you want, white, green, black, yellow, what have you, and that'll help the adhesion of the wood to the metal tang. If you just stick wood straight to steel, usually it'll stick pretty good with a good quality epoxy, but it'll stick even better if you put that liner material in between. It also has a very nice little visual appeal. So once we have the right size wood with the liner attached to it, we're going to hold it just like I'm holding it there, and we'll go over to the drill press and we'll drill holes through these three main holes, which are going to be our pinholes. These larger holes, the four of them there, they're just what I call an epoxy bridge hole, so that the epoxy glue will be able to travel from one side of the handle scales to the other and make kind of a complete bridge and just adhere with that much greater strength. Once we have the right shape and we have the holes drilled, then we glue the handle on. And I've got some knives here. Okay, here's kind of what it looks like. It was cut out, chamfered here in the front, and this is the knife, the neck knife with the handle glued on, but you can see how rough that is. You can see the handles are just a little bit oversized, and you can see a little bit of excess epoxy glue in there. Any of the glue that would have seeped out in this joint or in this seam, when we glued the handle, we would clean up right away, because that'd be impossible to clean up after the fact. So here's the handle all glued up. From here, we're going to go travel over to our grinders, and I'll show you a really quick grinding demonstration. Then we'll come back and I'll show you some of the other finishing steps. So follow me to the grinder. So with using a nice rough belt and a good vacuum system, which we're not going to turn on today for the sound, and I'll be sure to not breathe in any of the dust and make sure none of it gets into my eyes. Normal safety equipment that you would normally wear. But for your viewing pleasure, I'll grind this very quickly. Okay, so now you can see we're down to, we've got the metal flush with the wood, and the thing we would do after that was we would go around the whole profile of the handle, and we would do the same thing. We would get it all nice and flush. After that, what we do is we're going to adjust the thickness of these two halves of wood, make sure we have the same amount of wood on both sides for perfect symmetry, and then make sure we have the thickness that we're looking for. We might use a pair of calipers like this. We might measure and get the measurement that we're looking for. And for neck knives, a thinner handle might conceal a little bit better under the clothes, something around 10 to 12 millimeters in thickness. And for continual use, a larger handle that really fills the hand is going to give you more comfortable use hour after hour, like for example, if you're carving wood or something. So there's a give and take there with how fat or how wide you make the handle. Wider, more comfortable, thinner, more concealable. Okay, after we get that wood to the contour, to the thickness we want, then what we're going to do is we're going to start contouring these edges. We're going to chamfer them and make them comfortable to the hand. I'll show you that very quickly here. So there we have is a slight chamfering, a slight rounding of the corners. That's going to start to make it comfortable when we hold it in our hands. And then, of course, we're going to chamfer these inside corners as well. So that brings us to the pile of knives that we have here. All of these knives are in different stages of being worked on, but if we progress to the next obvious stage here, as you can see, this handle has got the nice chamfers. It's nicely rounded out. The holes where we're going to put the pins are still empty. And in fact, if they still have any glue in them, sometimes you need to take them back to the drill press and just clean them out using the same size drill bit that you put that hole in with in the first place. The same size as your pin stock. But you see that's all nicely sanded down to 220 grit. Okay, so functionally you could hold that in your hand and you could use it at this point, even though it's not finished. From there, we'll take our chosen pin stock and we'll carefully put it in those holes. And we'll trim that off. There we go. So we have two pins. Pardon me. Pick up the other one. There we go. Now, we're only going to put pins in the first two holes because in the middle, with our neck knives, we like to put in a little mosaic pin for style. So I'll show you very quickly how we peen these pins to get them to stay in place and to act as a mechanical fastener. Okay, so we have both pins in place. We need to grind those down to just the right length, and then we're going to peen them. Okay. So here we go, with the pin sticking out just about a millimeter on either side. Now we're going to peen them with a hammer. Oops, sorry. Okay, so there's the head of the pin, and round we go, expanding that pin to a diameter larger than it was before. We do the one side, we flip it over, and we do the other side. Okay, so now we have these pins peened in. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to grind just the heads of the pins flush with the handle. You notice though we still have one hole that's open and we're going to put a mosaic pin in there. I've got an example of a knife here that's got the mosaic pin in it already. Okay, so this is the mosaic pin in the middle and it's been inserted and glued into place. You can see the glue is all cured. And what we do is we'll take the hacksaw and cut that off, and we'll end up with something like this. There's the two peened pins, the center mosaic pin, and what we'll do at this point is we're going to grind those flush. So here's an example of a handle that's been ground flush. You've got the two pins, the top and bottom, and the mosaic pin in the center. Very distinctive. You can see that pattern very clearly. Now what remains is once we have the handle like this, it is essentially functional. That handle's been epoxied on there. It's never going to come off. It's got peened pins in there and a glued mosaic pin. But what we want to do is we want to then hand sand that. We've got a special device called a knife maker's vise. Come and check that out real quick. So we have this special vise that with the handle on the back of it allows the vise to spin in place. And this handle here will lock the blade in there. So now as I'm sanding by hand with some sandpaper, maybe first with 320 grit and then lastly with 400 grit sandpaper, as I'm sanding different facets of this handle, I can spin it around in place here and continue the final finishing process. Now the whole time I'm hand sanding, remember I said in my last video, if it's meant to be held in the hand, it ought to be finished by hand. And every time we're sanding it, we're holding it in our hand and feeling, is there a corner there that needs to come off? Does it need more rounding? Is it symmetrical? Are there any little scratches or something, imperfections in there that need to be taken care of? Once we are satisfied with our 400 grit sanding, then we go to the buffer and we buff it up and make it nice and shiny. I'll sand just one side of this and then buff one side, and you can see the difference between the buff side and the not buff side. So I'll get some 400 grit sandpaper and we'll do that quickly. Okay, we've got our 400 grit sandpaper here. I like to use the sandpaper in little squares and then use it up completely before throwing it away. I don't like to rip the sandpaper. This is just a nice, efficient, economical way of using up your sandpaper. Real gratifying when you finally have to throw away your little block of sandpaper. One dead giveaway is going to be scratches still remaining in those pins. Those pins are harder than the handle material, and you want to really get nice natural light and see those pins. And if you see any scratch, in fact, I can see some scratches from the 240 grit sandpaper right here. So I've got to work those a little bit more. But you can see my sandpaper is getting near its end of its useful life here. Okay, let's go buff that and see if we can see the difference between the hand sanded side and the non-hand sanded side. Okay, so we just buffed the handle after hand sanding it. On the one side looks really nice and clean and smooth, and in examination, close examination of the light, you really can't see any imperfections. But if we look at the other side, which I buffed lightly, we can see a whole bunch of striations from the 240 grit sandpaper, one of the earlier stages. So that wraps it up. That's how we put the handles on our really popular neck knives. And you can see there's a lot of work involved, many hours of work just trying to get that handle just to fit to that tang of that blade perfectly and to be comfortable so it'll be a good, reliable, and comfortable companion for life. This is Murray Carter with Carter Cutlery.